Call to order the Finance Committee meeting of Monday, June 21st, 2021. And Dave, I'll ask you to call the roll.
Council President Abbas.
Present.
Alder Carter.
Present.
Alder Verveer.
Here.
Alder Furman.
Present.
Alder Curry.
Here.
Alder Figueroa Cole.
Here.
Mayor, you have quorum.
Thank you. We have no general public comment. So I'll move on to disclosures and recusals. Are there any disclosures or recusals on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll go on to the consent agenda. We have, so item 1 is a confirmation hearing, so we'll separate that. And then we have registrants wishing to speak on items 17 and 18. We also have registrants not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions on items 2, 3, 9, and 13. Are there any items that alders would wish to see separated from the consent agenda? Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. Please separate agenda items number 5 and 13 for questions.
5 and 13.
Thank you.
Yep. Are there other items that alders would like to see? Alder Carter.
Is item 8 on the consent agenda?
It is currently, yes.
That's fine. I'll ask my questions offline.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any other items that alders would wish to see separated from the consent agenda? All right, seeing none, then we will separate items 1, 5, 13, 17, and 18. President Abbas, a motion on the consent agenda?
Move motion to approve the consent agenda.
Alder Carter, will you second?
Second.
So the consent agenda is moved and seconded. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing none, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda, and we'll move to item 1, which is Legistar 65842, submitting the appointment of Heather Stouter for confirmation of a 5-year term as the Planning Division Director. President Abbas, a motion, please.
Motion for a confirmation of 5-year terms for Heather.
Alder Carter.
Second.
Moved and seconded to confirm. Is there any questions or discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of confirmation? Seeing none, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of confirmation and see Ms. Stouter at the council meeting. That brings us to item 5, which is Legistar 65845, authorizing the execution of a purchase and sale agreement with Parkwood Partners for acquisition of 1901 and 1915 South Park Street for land banking purposes. President Abbas, a motion, please.
Motion to authorize the purchase sales agreement.
Second.
Moved and seconded to authorize. Alder Verveer, you have questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Oh, first, let me just state at the outset that I am in support of the resolution. As Alderperson Carter well knows, this subject property has been before the ALRC way too many times over the years for all the wrong reasons, although that business is out of business that brought them there so many times. My question actually relates to the billboard that is either part of this purchase or adjacent to the subject property. Could I have staff just confirm for me if indeed we are inheriting Adams Outdoor Advertising or some other company's billboard lease with this purchase?
Alder Rivera, I think you will like the answer, and Dan Rolfs and Matt Miklajewski are both here. Dan, did you want to answer?
Certainly. Alder, you are correct that we are acquiring that billboard as a part, assuming that the council approves acquisition, we would acquire that billboard.
Well, thank you. And as the mayor knows, I like the answer to that question as she articulated. Can you just walk through us then, please, Dan, what that means? If we inherit the lease, are we required to maintain this double-sided billboard for a period of time at all, or can we move to terminate that lease promptly?
Alder, I understand your desire. The lease is in place, I believe, through 2025 or 2026. So we would need to leave it in place. However, we are not required to renew it. So we would be in a position to have that lease run out, and then it would be removed if that is a desire of the council.
Thank you. It's too bad that we are stuck with that lease for several years into the future, but terminating it at all is a good thing, and I'm sure any redevelopment of the property would want it gone. And certainly I'm a little concerned that might delay redevelopment for a period of years. Perhaps we certainly have seen that in the past on East Washington Avenue, where these billboards have delayed redevelopment. But hopefully that isn't the case.
We will move expeditiously, assuming this is approved, to notify the billboard owners that we will not be renewing the lease, and that we would have them be prepared to remove the billboard as soon as the lease expires.
Thank you. Or perhaps buy them out in advance of the lease term ending.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder Carter.
Yeah, Dan, I believe that they would have the option to break the lease if they wanted to.
I believe if they were inclined to leave
After we purchase it, if it's approved.
When you say break the lease, just to make sure I'm understanding, you mean they could leave early? Is that
They
correct?
can leave early if so desired.
I believe that we would be amenable to that. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, it's item 5 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor. That will take us to item 13, which is Legistar 65838. On item 13, Amy Scanlon is available to answer questions from engineering if anyone has them. And it is authorizing the Madison Fire Department and City Engineering to design an expanded addition and an expanded interior remodel plan at Fire Station 6 to accommodate a double company. President Abbas, let's get a motion on the table, please.
Yep, move the motion to authorize the remodeling and expansion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Alder Rivera.
Thanks again, Mayor. Yeah, I don't have a question for Amy or anyone else in the engineering division. My questions were of fire department staff. I see Nicole Marie is here. I don't see, are there chiefs here too? I don't see them.
We have at least one assistant chief here.
Oh, great. Who's that? I don't see them on the list.
There you go.
Assistant Chief Scott Bavery is here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks very much. So my question is this: when Chief Davis was before this committee last year with the agreement with the town to assume their fire service and protection. He articulated, and I don't want to put words in Steve's mouth, but something to the effect of that you all were somewhat pleasantly surprised by the calls for service that were reported by the town fire department in your conversations with them and negotiations with the town. So I was curious, what has changed in that? Apparently, the calls for service that you're seeing from the town have increased since we've assumed that responsibility. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, Alder. I appreciate that question because it's an important one, and really it's kind of one of the main driving factors of this remodel. Obviously, there's more than just this issue at Station 6, but this is a big one, and we've seen since we've taken over the call volume, we've seen a double basically of what Station 6 was doing before. We're real close to that. They're averaging about 9 calls per day per shift there, which is a lot of wear and tear on that the ladder truck. So the ability to at least look down the future at some point, it may not be in my career, I get that, but instead of having to do another remodel in 10, 12 years to accommodate a bigger crew. And I know that ties into the operating budget too, but at some point to build this station, not only as as something proud that the South Side can really take ownership in, not only our members, but also the community, but also to really give the ability to provide a quality service with an engine and a ladder. At some point, we already have the ambulance there. So that's what that double company would be, an engine and a ladder. And it's really based on that call volume, how it's really almost like doubled.
Interesting. Did you have any ideas that you all been noodling as to why that has increased so substantially since the city's taken over the service there?
Well, I think, and the bulk of those calls are definitely EMS driven, which is obviously kind of what we're seeing in our community anyways, but I'm not sure if it's post-COVID, but definitely the numbers that we anticipated were less than what we're definitely seeing. The crews, it's the busiest ladder truck now in the city, and we have 5 of them. So,
thank you. And so you said that I don't want to put words in your mouth and hold you to it, but you're saying that the long-term thinking of the department at this point is that you wouldn't propose to us policymakers to add an engine company there for, did you say 9 or 10 years, perhaps not that long out? Or?
Yeah, I hope it's not that long. It really depends on the call volume, and it's just like I said, the wear and tear of a ladder, like of the big ladders. Now we are working really hard, diligently, obviously with Pierce. You've obviously seen the electric vehicle that's come up, but we're working hard with them to also create a smaller footprint for the ladder trucks, but getting in and out of the town. So there's some really small areas, some of the trailer parks, things that the ladder truck it's just really, really difficult to get in and out, especially with cars parked. But to offset that and really make sure that we're not responding from all the way from Station 14 or from Station 9 or different areas to make sure that we have coverage at some point. And I'm not sure if it's going to be, 3, obviously that's a whole nother, operational change and budget stuff to deal with. But it's definitely the next closest opportunity to make that a double company. And I think there's ways that the fire department, to be honest with you, has to look and look at all the other double companies, and maybe it's just moving personnel around to make that a double company. But so if it's 4 years, if it's 5 years, or if it's a couple, and we have to work within the budget constraints, some of those creative thinking, staffing wise, will probably have to come into play, I'm assuming.
Yeah, thank you for all those responses, and thanks for answering the question in your responses about what a double company is. I mean, that's a medic, an engine, and a ladder, at least in our department. So we have those at Station 7 and 8 now, and we formerly had enjoyed that downtown at Station 1, as you know. The fiscal note, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but the fiscal note for this kind of confused me a little, because it made it seem that a second ambulance, a second med unit, would be housed at Station 6, which we've never had in our department history, as far as I know, having 2 med units at the same station. Is there actually a thought to have 2 med units stationed sometime in the future at Station 6, or is this clearly all with the notion of adding 4 personnel to Station 6 sometime in the future and adding an engine for the double companies like we know we've had it, again, currently at 7 and 8 and formally at 1?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Alder, because I just noticed that today on the paperwork too. Yeah, so the ambulance wouldn't be an additional ambulance there. 1 ambulance per station is kind of like how you said how we've done that in the past. So if we do get that additional 9th ambulance at some point, I think the push is really to obviously evaluate it, but right now it's really to look at Station 14 to help offset some of the busier crews throughout, but it would just definitely stay the 1 ambulance at this point at Station 6.
Yeah, thank you for confirming that. I'm sure that was music to Alderperson Curry's ears, that the department's current thinking is that your need is most clearly on the southeast side of the city, and if indeed we're able to give you that additional med unit in our deliberations later this year, it would be stationed at 14. Correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks very much, Chief. Appreciate all your responses and help clarify things. Perhaps we might consider amending the fiscal note because it might confuse others besides just me. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Let's see, Alder Curry.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm sorry for asking these questions, but I think I assume that I know what a double company means, but could you explain that, Chief?
Yeah, absolutely. So a single company, and I'll throw out Station 3, for example. What we call a company is basically an engine or a ladder. So a single company, Station 3, has 1 engine and an ambulance. I'm not really sure on the history of how long we've never included the ambulance, but a single station company is either 1 engine or 1 ladder. So currently at Station 6, it's a single company, which has the ladder truck there. It also has an ambulance, but that doesn't, I guess, count, or at least count in the count. But currently, Station 6 has staffed 6 people. We call it a single company for just the basis, again, of 4 people on that ladder truck. If we make this a double company at some point down the road, it would have an engine and a ladder, which each have 4 people on them. So that gives us our 8 people, and then obviously the ambulance as well. So it'd be a total of 10 people. And that's coming into play with just the rearranging of the definitely the second floor at Station 6. For those of you that have been in there, it's really not laid out for 10 people for sure. It's not even really laid out really well, to be honest with you. The big push of this is for our own people, for just the gender differences and making sure everyone feels comfortable and safe coming to work. But the real difference between a single company and a double company is adding another large apparatus, either an engine or a ladder, to add 4 more people to the station. So when this station would be, if it gets to that point at some point, that it would go from 6 people to 10 people that would work out of Station 6 every day.
Alder, you're muted.
My bad. So I have 2 more questions. Second one, I'm hoping will be short. You mentioned a lot of wear and tear on the ladder and the increase with the attachment. I'm assuming that's the same for calls for service for EMT.
Yeah, I think, again, all the vehicles that we're looking at, we're currently trying to really figure out ways to reduce some of the profiles, right? And not get the wear and tear on the road. I mean, like these ladder trucks are really heavy apparatus, right? So there's not just wear and tear on the actual equipment, but there's wear and tear on the roads. They tend to have, more accidents. So we're obviously trying to really reduce that profile with better technology and things like that. But a big part of wear and tear is also our people. It may not sound like a lot of calls on 9 calls a day, but for those of you that are familiar with Station 6's territory, I was stationed there for a few years in my career, and I loved it. And one of the reasons, well, there's multiple reasons why I loved it, but first of all and foremost is the community is really engaged there. We constantly had young kids coming over and playing basketball and really engaged, and it was a really fun territory. but it also for a firefighter and a paramedic, it really challenges you in this territory because of the community, the belt line. You have every aspect of calls in that territory, which really challenges you. The belt line, and for example, for sure, with the high risk collisions and crashes, there's some downsides of that challenge, right? Is some of the trauma that our people see and have to deal with. So we try to spread that around and try to balance the call volume as much as we can throughout our 86 individuals on duty every day.
Thank you. Okay, my last question is as pertains to the additions. And I know that you talked about to accommodate staff, gender inclusivity, and such. With Madison College being next door and this plan going forward, are there any thoughts about offering additional training resources? I know it's not necessarily a facility, but is there any thought with this proposal that some of those could enhance? I know Anderson's site is a little compromised with all the other municipalities.
Yeah, that's a great question. We utilize the community room / training room at Station 6 now, and it's definitely one of the highlights of this remodel is to incorporate obviously there's not a community event going on or a community meeting. Our people utilize kind of more the book side of it and the technology side of some types of training there. Also some hands-on EMS trainings. As far as the facility goes, as you know, Station 6 doesn't really have a lot of grounds, meaning like outside that lot is so small that it doesn't really allow us to expand too much. And not even the building, but the area, the lot to create like training props. And the fire training stuff of Madison College is clearly designated out by the airport at that facility. So we obviously broke kind of away from Madison College just because we really struggle the scheduling side of working. All the agencies can go through Madison College, and we definitely still use it. We have a great relationship with the frontline staff there. However, it's difficult when they run their academies, and we have so many people that we have to get through our training. So we've really kind of try to kind of revamp that years ago, or a few years ago at least, and really incorporate our training center out at 14. So for Station 6, it's great because it's close. But that would be another huge benefit of a double company at Station 6 at some point. So the idea is if you had a training lined up at Station 14, you wouldn't leave your station empty. You could take just the ladder truck over to Station 14 or just the engine. So those double companies really give us a lot of flexibility. Now when we do it, we move crews around. So if like ladder 6 goes out to training, we might have to break up the double company at one just to kind of cover territory. So we definitely work within our ability every day to make sure that we don't leave territories susceptible to just longer delays in response times.
Great. Thank you, Alder Carter.
Yes, Chief, can you tell me a couple things? You talked about the mobile home park, but also, if I recall, Park Village has narrow lanes throughout their apartment complex. And does that create a challenge for you in addition to the mobile home park or even the Arboretum where Lost City is located?
Absolutely, Alder, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. There's Station 6 just has some territories that makes it it's more difficult, especially those streets that allow parking. And we work through it, but we definitely don't want to. There's always that fine line of pushing forth into an area that makes it unsafe for either other responders or other citizens that are just traveling around. But still getting there in a timely manner. So some of the pushes, these ladder trucks, even on the belt lines, they carry all the tools to do extrication, where we're the old school jaws of life type of talk that the engines can't carry. So the ability to get up onto these even the belt line where there's more room, but the ladder trucks just take a little bit longer to get there. Which in some cases can really mean life or death. So yeah, you brought up some great areas that that do make it difficult. Obviously, our ambulances are quite a bit smaller and can manipulate some of those smaller roads. But an engine down the road will definitely assist that and improve that process.
And my next question is the expansion of the women's dorm. Is that expansion includes growth?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest things, I think. So when I was involved in this meeting to help work with the design team, that was one of my first, and that was really what was driving the remodel to begin with. Obviously, there's some updates and stuff more that Amy could probably talk about, some of the the utility stuff and the mechanical stuff, but to make this a building that is not only proud for the community to see the outside of it and the inside of it, but to truly make our men and women on our job really want to come to work at Station 6. It's one of there's only like really 2 stations that come to mind that still have some issues with making it 100% comfortable for everyone in Station 6. As much as I loved working there, I'm really embarrassed to even tell you right now we currently have no women at Station 6, and a big part of that is just the building itself. So we're hoping to really turn that around. When I was stationed there, we had a really diverse crew, and but things have changed over 15 years since I've worked there, and now seeing what the other stations provide and how much more accessible it is to everyone, and making sure everyone feels happy and safe and proud to call that their firehouse. It's definitely a needed improvement.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions for staff on item 13? All right. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on item 13? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 13. And that will take us to item 17. And we have a few folks here, I think, who wish to speak on item 17. First registrant is Evelyn Gilderoy-Voiles of Farley Ave, to be followed by James DeGray.
Hello, my name is Evelyn Gilderoy-Voiles. I do live at 202 Farley Avenue. I would like to thank the mayor, the alders, and all the committee members for focusing on ending homelessness in Madison and for committing to treating our unhoused neighbors with dignity. I thoroughly support the proposed initial capital budget amendments, including funding for the purpose-built 24 hours men's shelter and the Occupy Madison Solar Project. As the city moves forward with these necessary and long-term projects, I am heartened to see operating funds being proposed to be set aside for supporting unsheltered people before these projects are finished. While Madison increases its housing and shelter options, there will be continued need for supporting people who are unable for physical, mental, or time accessibility reasons to access shelter. I hope the city will invest in a mobile shower truck that would be able to bring the dignity of showers to those staying outside. I also encourage the city to designate or obtain several sites that the city feels would be suitable for outdoor encampments. These sites should be supported with water, portable toilets, trash removal, and lighting as needed. In order to foster community and continuity of care, the sites should be fully accessible to emergency vehicles, outreach workers, and volunteers. Let us continue to strive to create a Madison that treats all of its residents with dignity and grace, regardless of their housing status. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next registrant is James DeGray of Portage Road, to be followed by Pearl Foster.
James, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself.
*6 to unmute yourself on the phone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
My name is James DeGray. I am hopeful that the funds will be good for Madison, and I would like to see some things that Evelyn was just talking about, support for those who are unhoused, and specifically, though, I would like to see long-term solutions invested in, because, well, homelessness has been around longer than houses have. And I think being at the ready in case of any type of disaster is tantamount. It's the same thing as caring for the homeless, because there might be a disaster that makes many homeless people next month or the month after. And I just think it's a good idea to accept the money and try to make new programs and keep the ones that are running. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next registrant is Pearl Foster of Worth Court, to be followed by Timothy Jones.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
The City of Madison and the Mayor have demonstrated our unhoused populations to be unseen and unheard, as well as their advocates are not worth their time. Yet in April, the city put out the Housing Forward Initiative, a pretty 2-page pamphlet that can be found online with the proposed 5-pronged approach to address our housing needs. These include 1, increase housing choice; 2, create affordable housing throughout the city; 3, combat displacement and segregation; 4, ensure seniors and others can stay in their homes; 5, work to end homelessness. And it includes a little sidebar with things that City of Madison has done the past 2 years, including, it says, shifted our homeless services approach to protect people experiencing homelessness from COVID-19. If shifting means going against CDC guidelines and breaking up homeless encampments and not providing the requirements of TPUs, then yes, but it definitely leaves out to protect. And now we'll have a presentation with a bunch of numbers, but few solutions. This is frustrating and it's sad. The city has time for little pamphlets and lots of words and lots of meetings, but little action. The encampment at Randall is 3 times the size that it was when the eviction was halted about a month and a half ago, and will continue to grow as the ban on housing evictions is lifting, as well as the other encampments throughout the city. We don't have time to wait. We cannot continue with the status quo. We need to stop throwing money into the same programs which haven't solved the issue of homelessness yet, and we need to think outside the box for solutions. The National Alliance to End Homelessness put out an article in 2017 describing how a chronically homeless person costs a taxpayer an average $35,578 per year. However, supportive housing costs on average $12,800. Now, those numbers were from a few years ago, but they show how far $2 million that the mayor has allocated would help our city and those most vulnerable. We need to put the skills and community building into an environment that is stable, legal, and self-sustaining. This isn't hard. Madison already has a long history with housing co-ops and the new model with the tiny house Occupy Village. The mission of the Eco Village project of Fresno provides safe and dignified living spaces in an environmentally sustainable manner, giving each resident the educational, emotional, and physical tools, caring, support, and training to escape the cycle of homelessness. This is a sustainable vision. The Coyote Tiny House Community Village of Olympia, Washington, has now spread to include 2 more communities to help our veterans. Their vision and mission promotes personal growth and access to care and services, fosters community, promotes empowerment and sustainability while educating the public, and promotes equity and inclusion. This type of housing saves on budgetary social services long term. We can do it. We as a community, as a society, can invest in solutions that are based on needs and empowerment. We can certainly use these new funds to invest in land, and we have a very giving community that would come together to help our most vulnerable. We need immediate action and not another tent city at McPick Park in the polar vortex of Wisconsin winter. I don't even care, Mayor, if you call it Satya's Eco Village. Let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next registrant is Timothy Jones of Sherman Ave.
Hello, my name is Tim. I am focusing my support in direction of the project named Unsheltered Homeless Support. My wish is to encourage actions on behalf of our community over the longest of terms. And so in the context of decisions around these newly available funds, I advocate the following. help incubate systems for the sharing of time and effort in an organized way, while investing to provide those in need and our community with at least one formal encampment of those unsheltered. Yes, a real and an open place, a place for encampment to rest one's head and hopefully more. Located and designed for sustained serviceability. Serviceability provided at a trauma-informed awareness level throughout. Trauma-informed throughout the multidisciplinary and multifaceted relationships that are called for. Relationships contributing to value in each individual here and now. But the here and now, while we all refine our awareness and consider the potentials for our time and the potentials for the coming generation's time in this place. And I urge that we invest the other portions of these funds to make encampment for the unsheltered increasingly functional by way of achieving a systems collaborative approach to serving people encamped as much as place encamped. This can be viewed as an investment in developing the coordination and sharing of time and effort. Time and effort in advancement of different yet co-supportive models for serving needs through participatory processes. Models like Occupy Madison's tiny house model, as it inspires and engages with the broader community of support. I address you as an individual who, as a member of the Madison Mutual Aid Network, has made, facilitated, and above all, witnessed many others' significant contributions in community to building efforts and realizing the above, all worth celebrating. Also, in becoming a member of Occupy Madison during the time and effort shared by hundreds of people over the final 3 months of last year, as they joined with those who've now become residents of the tinier houses we all built, I've appreciated the accumulating impact of the relationship building processes that make respite and healing a possibility for more of our community. May another step be taken by you here and now toward the establishment of and service to such place, such encampment for unsheltered people with just and long-sighted vision for all of us. My appreciation, Mayor, Alders, for having this budget.
Thank you. We also have Karen Crossley of Lakeland Ave in support, available for questions, representing the Madison Public Market Foundation. Laura Heisler of South Ingersoll in support, representing the Madison Public Market Foundation, and James Shulkin also in support, none of them wishing to speak. Are there questions for any of our registrants? Seeing none, President Abbas, let's get a motion on the table, please.
Yep, motion to move substitute for approval.
All right, motion to approve the substitute.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the substitute. Are there questions for staff? Or is there any discussion on item 17? Seeing none, Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. Are you I guess, insinuating that there was no planned staff presentation by Dave or anyone else?
I'm happy to have staff do a presentation if you wish, Alder.
I don't, this is obviously a very big deal. I just assumed that there would be because there was a beautiful, obviously, PowerPoint presentation that I presume most of us did review on our own over the weekend. But, so I personally, I guess, don't need it. I could go right to questions. I just frankly assume that there would be a presentation because Dave is known for his very insightful presentations.
Well, we'll allow Dave to be insightful then. Dave? Unless Alder Carter, you have an objection?
I was just going to say I've been waiting all day for Dave's presentation.
Well, there you go. Dave?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Alder Revere, Alder Carter. This is a group effort, so I will do my best to go through it. And I'm sure if you have questions, we have a number of staff here who can attempt to answer them. So I will share my screen. All right, can everyone see that? Great. So we'll put all of this, what we're talking about with the American Rescue Plan Act funding into context with the not only the 2022 budget, but revenue losses that have already occurred, budget shortfalls that we anticipate to happen this year. We'll take a look at the American Rescue Plan Act, or we'll refer to by the acronym of ARPA, and its allowable uses, the strategy that's proposed for those funds that in the resolution and the substitute that's before you, and further background on the community investment proposals that are spelled out or at least outlined in the resolution. First, giving you some background, we've talked about this in a number of different forums, but the pandemic has had a severe impact on city revenues, as well as the public generally and businesses and so on. As you recall, in the 2021 budget that was adopted back in November, the city did use $8 million of fund balance, what's also referred to as its rainy day fund, $8 million, an unprecedented amount. And looking ahead to the 2022 budget that you will be deliberating on later in the fall, right now we are projecting an $18 million shortfall in that general and library fund budget between cost to continue and available revenues. So we are also anticipating for 2021, and we will update our projections after second quarter data is available in July. But right now we're projecting almost a $5 million deficit compared to that adopted operating budget. We've also had, as we talked about again in other meetings, reserves reduced in the parking utility considerably. Just again, not much parking activity had happened as stay-at-home orders were in place. The room tax fund finished 2020 with a $1.8 million deficit, and that's despite 50% cuts to its programs. And I'll just remind everyone that the programs funded from the room tax fund and allocated by the Room Tax Commission include funding to subsidize Monona Terrace activities. And so Monona Terrace needs that funding to operate in addition to its own source revenues, which have been heavily impacted by the pandemic. It also funds the city's subsidy under the agreement between the city and Overture. It funds the city's contribution to that, which was also cut in 2020. And then it also funds the tourism marketing activities of Destination Madison, the city's Convention and Visitors Bureau, which is aimed primarily at activities, again, at Monona Terrace and assisting with marketing Monona Terrace and its short and long-term booking of conventions and conferences. Room Tax Fund is also projecting a deficit of an additional $3.3 million. That's net of the amount that's usually transferred to the general fund compared to the adopted room tax allocations. Again, because of the slower recovery in the group travel area, particularly in urban centers like Madison and our downtown core and conferences and conventions. And so that experience has also happened in Monona Terrace's own source revenues, meaning the revenues it generates from payments to rent its facility for conferences and conventions and other activities, payments that are made for various services that they provide, such as audiovisual services and so on. And we're currently projecting a cash loss of $3.5 million through the end of 2021. So what is proposed for use of those ARPA dollars and another funding source that we'll get into in a minute is to address many of those shortfalls and deficits and keep those programs that I just mentioned sustained. So turning to the eligible uses of the American Rescue Plan Act funding. So just again, a reminder, the city will be receiving $47.2 million, and half of that funding has already been received, and the second half will be received a year from now or so. There's 5 general areas. First is that public health response, public safety response of the COVID-19 pandemic and the costs associated with that. Economic hardship, the negative economic effects of the pandemic, so supporting families, small businesses, the hardest hit economic sectors. The third is what we call revenue loss, but it's also maintaining government services. And so there's a calculation that's involved in that to define how much of that $47 million, the maximum that the city could spend on, in effect, maintaining the services that it provides due to those revenue losses. There's also a premium pay provision for essential workers, and essential workers are pretty clearly defined under the Treasury rule and the sectors that those essential workers participate in. And then finally, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure is also an allowable expenditure. So what you see in the resolution is focused really on number 2 and 3 here in terms of economic hardship and maintaining government services. So that maintaining government services is really defined by a methodology that is laid out in the interim rule from Treasury, which in effect takes a look backwards over the 3 years prior to the pandemic and the rate of growth in our revenues over that span of time, or 4.1%, whichever is higher. And so for us, our look back is actually higher. It's about 5.4% on average is what our revenues in this overall bundle of revenues that that Treasury has us look at, which is effectively everything that the city does except for the transit utility and the water utility, which are their revenues are excluded from this overall test. And so just looking at this, our actual revenues in 2020 compared to what's called this counterfactual, meaning what revenues would have been without the pandemic, already there's a gap of over $44 million between what we actually took in and under this methodology under the Treasury rule, what we would have taken in. So we expect that there will be a gap again when we look at actual revenues for 2021, 2022, and 2023 that will more than exceed the $47 million. And what this test tells us is that if it so chooses, the city could spend its entire $47 million on government services and maintaining those services. The other revenue stream that's being contemplated to address these shortfalls is the surplus in Tax Increment District 25. That district has been in place for over 25 years. It's reaching the end of its statutory life under state law. It's also reached the end of what it needs to do overall. But it has tax increments from this district have funded the Block 89 redevelopment, the parking at the Menorah Terrace Hilton Hotel, as well as financing the underground parking utility garage on East Wilson Street that was recently completed, and supporting other public infrastructure and private development loans in the district. So it's really this sort of East Wilson Street, Southeast Capitol area. The resolution to close the district will be introduced at the next council meeting, and it's anticipated that the surplus that is built up, so these are unused tax increments from the district, it will reach around $30 million by the end of 2022. And all of that gets distributed to the underlying taxing jurisdiction. So the Madison Metropolitan School District, Dane County, Madison College, and the city, based on their relative share of the tax base. And so the city's share of the tax base is a little over 1/3 of that total tax base. So we would expect to get about $10 million from that surplus that it's proposed to be allocated to help fill some of these gaps and in effect, make those federal dollars go further for the community investments that are laid out in this resolution. In addition, again, as you're aware, when tax increment districts can be closed or project costs paid, can be kept open one additional year, and that increment used for affordable housing. And so TID 25 is expected to generate a little under $5 million for affordable housing purposes, and that'll be collected in calendar year 2023. We're also allowed to make early distributions of that surplus after the closure resolution is adopted, the one that will be introduced on July 6th. And those will probably be used this year to both assist the school district in some of its financial needs and timing of when they need funding, as well as be available to the city for these shortfalls. So turning back to the ARPA local government aid and the overall strategy that's envisioned in the resolution that's introduced by the mayor. First, as I said, there's the $47 million. And costs can be incurred through the end of 2024, and we'll continue to report on those through the end of 2026. So dollars can be committed through the end of 2024, and that the actual spending, as long as, for example, money has been obligated or it's under contract, can continue for 2 more years after that. What's proposed in the resolution is to split that $47.2 million roughly in half, with a little under $23 million for community investments, and those are spelled out in the resolution. We'll go into that in some detail in this presentation. With a large share of that first tranche, that first half of the money being allocated to these community investments. And this is for immediate, short-term, one-time costs, again, trying to stay away from ongoing operating expenses, since this is a one-time source of funding to the city. And then using the roughly other half, a little over $24 million, to balance the general fund budget and avoid the use of fund balance again in the 2022 budget. Stabilize the Monona Terrace Enterprise Fund, which we talked about earlier, and the Room Tax Fund and its programs, namely that subsidy to Monona Terrace, the subsidy for the operations of Overture Center, and the tourism marketing efforts to bring business, convention, and conferences and so on to Madison that is performed by Destination Madison. The proposal does not have any of this funding going to the parking utility. And the parking utility, while its reserves have been drawn down significantly, continues to have a balance. And future for ramp replacements will really have to be looked at from either some form of borrowing or other funding sources, such as tax increment financing with tax increment districts that might be set up, which, for example, is contemplated for the Lake Street ramp replacement, for example. All right, so putting some numbers to all of this. This may get a little confusing, but I'll try to lay it out for you. And if you have questions, we can work through them. Sort of at the top of this table is the shortfalls and the deficits that we have in the general fund, Monona Terrace, and the room tax fund. And so in the general fund, as I said, the 2021 budget allocated some of that, some of our fund balance, our rainy day fund, unprecedented amount to balance that budget. We also contemplate a further shortfall in 2021 based on revenues projections as well as expenditure projections for 2021. And that'll be updated as we do the second quarter projections next month. And then we have an $18 million gap, as we've talked about. This plan assumes that some of that shortfall for 2022 will be met by cuts and maybe perhaps other measures. And then 13 million of that 18 million would be addressed as a part of this overall strategy. I talked about Monona Terrace and its shortfalls, which total $3.5 million. And I've talked about the room tax fund, the deficit from 2020, its continued shortfall in 2021, and the total there to maintain those programs. Again, that Overture subsidy, the Monona Terrace subsidy, and the Destination Madison activities. So overall, there's gaps and use of fund balance that's total over $34 million. And so closing that $34 million, some of that will be through application of that surplus from TID 25, that $10 million. There's also, this is a 2-year approach. So in 2021, not replenishing the fund balance in the general fund right away, but doing that in 2022 again. So there's more money that can go to these community investments immediately. And so after taking that $10 million out, that's where the $24 million is arrived at from using the ARPA funding to meet the shortfalls described above. And that leaves the $22.8 million for the community investments. And you can see that split between the 2 years. A much greater emphasis on community investments right away in 2021. And then balance using other funding sources and some of the ARPA funding to help address shortfalls in 2021. And then a much greater share of that ARPA funding to help balance the 2022 budget, for example, and meet those other shortfalls in 2022. Okay, so that's the overall budget and funding strategy. And now we'll turn to the resolution, the timeline on legislation and prioritization of these community investments. So first, legislative timeline. The initial resolution that is before you right now was introduced last week, and it makes those detailed allocations, those proposals from the mayor around how to allocate that $22.8 million. And it also includes amendments to the 2021 operating and capital budgets so that some of that funding can be immediately allocated to these community investments. The second part of the strategy this year, again, those of you who've been on the council know that we do mid-year appropriation adjustment resolutions as well as year-end appropriation adjustments. And those are measures to maybe we have deficits in certain funds or appropriations that need to be recalibrated because costs have exceeded what was originally estimated. And so what will be done in those resolutions will be addressing some of that general fund deficit using ARPA funds, addressing that room tax fund deficit, again, to sustain the Overture subsidy, the Monona Terrace subsidy, and the Destination Madison support. Again, using ARPA funds indirectly and that TID 25 surplus. And then that Monona Terrace deficit, addressing that using the TID 25 surplus. And then in the 2022 budget, which will be before you, the capital budget will be introduced at the end of August. The operating budget from the mayor will be introduced at the beginning of October. Those will include appropriations for the remainder of the ARPA funding. A large share of that 2022 general fund gap would be funded through ARPA. And although there will be some cuts necessary in there, and indirectly, restore that general fund balance using the TID 25 surplus, as well as charging costs to those remaining ARPA funds. So that's the timeline and the mechanisms very generally. So the resolution that's before you, there's the title. It also, it makes those sort of proposed allocations and then makes an immediate appropriation of funding. So the resolution lays out the ARPA guidelines that I explained earlier, and that very general allocation between community investments and maintaining government services. And then the mayor has identified sort of 5 major categories and priorities for these investments: violence prevention and youth employment, homelessness, affordable housing, emerging needs, and small business support. You can see the dollar amounts in each one of those. So now we'll turn to each of those major priority areas and the specific programs within each. So first, in violence prevention and youth engagement, a little under $2.6 million, with a little under half of that for public health violence prevention initiatives and implementing plans that they have put together. They immediately need around $160,000 for some of the program support that they need for that. And those specific initiatives will be built out further, and the rest of that funding would be included in the 2022 budget. There's a series of 3 sort of youth employment efforts focused on this summer, 2021, that the $465,000 is focused on proposals that did not get funded through the RFP process, of funding all of those, and the extent to which those proposals will support fall employment opportunities for youth. That's also a possibility, as well as what are called some youth re-engagement activities, which would be some partnerships between the parks and the libraries around ways that to engage youth and youth employment. And then the crisis response team, the community alternative response to emergency services, and some additional funding there in public health with its electronic health record system, as well as to help fund an external evaluator of the program to be sure it's meeting its performance objectives and so on. And so much of what you see here would be in the initial resolution to help support youth employment immediately and support these alternative approaches on emergency services and violence, some of the violence prevention funding. Turning to homelessness, again, about $8.6 million. First is $2.5 million as a part of a larger effort to purchase the Darbo site from Salvation Army. And that's, again, a larger effort around Salvation Army looking to consolidate its activities as a part of its redevelopment of the East Washington site. And that, because that's a longer term effort, would be included in the 2022 capital budget. A lot of the efforts around how to address the needs of those who are unsheltered homeless, and $2 million allocated to that. And that would help to support strategies that are currently in development around how to help those who are outside of the shelter system right now. And so that would be in the initial resolution. There's the purpose-built men's shelter. Again, what is currently in the budget is insufficient for both the acquisition and the full build out of whatever site is ultimately chosen. And so this is one element of city's contribution. I'm looking hopefully for the county to contribute more to this as well. And that is an immediate need too. Next is an endowment for shelter operations, meaning creating an endowment. And this would be some seed funding with the goal of other contributions, both public and private, towards a larger fund. And its investment earnings would then support the operating costs of shelters that are now being built. So the purpose-built men's shelter and other efforts. And this would be in the 2022 budget. And then you heard some testimony around the solar project as a part of the Occupy Madison, tiny houses, and again, providing some funding to put solar power into those facilities and to help reduce operating costs as a result. And that would be an immediate need. Affordable housing, again, a little under $6.7 million, with the largest proposal in there, which would be in the 2022 budget. The concept of creating very low cost housing for individuals through the conversion of hotels. And this funding would be paired with a lot of other funding sources, for example, tax credits and so on, to help leverage funding for the conversion of perhaps 1 to 2 facilities along these lines, again, to help with the transition of individuals into permanent affordable housing. A youth-centered housing project, this has been identified as a key issue, particularly for youth that age out of foster care and often end up homeless. And again, concepts around how to provide shelter and facilities for those individuals. Again, that's an effort that'll need to be developed further, and it'll be in the 2022 capital budget. Another concept that is being developed to help with affordable housing is a tenant damage fund. This is in lieu of security deposits, and it's an approach that's been done in a number of cities. And it's been mandated in other cities. We can't mandate it under state law, but this would be an approach of trying to build a fund where perhaps like low interest loans could be given to individuals who are seeking housing, to help with that high upfront costs at times of a security deposit. Building home ownership, particularly for people of color, African Americans, and home ownership support. And again, these down payment assistance, rehabilitation loan programs. And this is a good partnership strategy as a part of an effort that the city is engaged in called the City Budgeting for Equity and Recovery. That's a Bloomberg Philanthropies effort to try to help cities with how are they allocating their budget towards ways to what they call turn the curve and improve outcomes in effect. And this is the area the city is focusing on. In the emergency rental assistance area, the CARES Act, the Consolidated Appropriations Act at the end of 2020, as well as the American Rescue Plan Act, all provide considerable amount of funding to help with paying rent and rent in arrears and utility costs and so on. And there are, as you're all aware, operating costs associated with that, administrative costs. And this funding, in partnership with some of the administrative funding from those particular programs, would be used to basically help with getting those funds out the door as rapidly as possible, and all of the criteria that have to be met in terms of information from applicants and so on. Particularly important as the eviction prohibitions are being lifted and so on. And then this energy efficiency program, this is for sort of already existing low-cost housing. How can that be made more efficient and from an energy perspective, as well as decreasing environmental toxins. So this would be funding to help with putting into place those measures, and that would be in the 2022 budget. Another category is emerging needs, and $1 million is allocated to that. So $700,000 to services to residents who are undocumented. Many of those individuals have not been able to be reached by some of the federal programs, such as stimulus payments and things like that. And needs have been identified there, and that would be an immediate appropriation. Again, connection to basic needs. These are some of the community director responses out of the COVID relief fund effort. And these are some of the proposals that could not be funded from that. PFAS, again, that continuing issue around testing, but also educating people around it, outreach, coordination efforts. About half the funding would be made available immediately, and then the rest will be appropriated in the 2020 budget. And then in the sort of senior population area, evaluating how the senior center can serve the a more diverse community, older adult population in Madison. This would help fund a consultant to take a closer look at that, and that would be in the 2022 budget. And then about a little under $4 million for economic recovery through neighborhood and small business revitalization programs. So in the Small Business Equity and Recovery Program, which is already operating, about $615,000 this year to meet immediate needs, make sure the program is fully funded this year, and then $2 million in 2022. What's in the SIP right now is the capital improvement plan right now is $2 million, and that's scheduled to be GO borrowing, and this $2 million would supplant that and use the ARPA funding instead. Retail building improvement grant program, so $500,000 immediately available, really to help retail establishments build out their commercial spaces, again, to get retail activity going. The public market has seen some delay in moving forward, and this is some gap financing for them and in their operations as they prepare for that project. That would be in the initial resolution. Neighborhood business district support. So again, the Black, Latino, Hmong chambers, the business improvement district, neighborhood associations would all be eligible for this funding, and it would be customized to help rebuild and recover economic and business activity in those neighborhood business districts. And then again, downtown vacant storefront art program, making again downtown, bringing people back downtown as the recovery moves forward. So that's all of the 5 priority areas, the programs within each. These last 2, I won't go into a lot of detail, but this just highlights what will be immediately amended in the 2021 operating budget and the 2021 capital budget that is in the resolution right now. So I'm going to stop there. I've done a lot of talking, and happy to answer questions. As I said, a number of people who are more expert on this than I am are here as well.
Thank you, Dave. Very comprehensive. Are there questions for Dave or any of the staff folks that are here on the particular issue items? Alder Carter.
Yes. So, Dave, for the purpose-built shelter, the amount is $2 million. Is that in addition to the approximately $3 million we have now for the shelter?
Yes. So $3 million has been appropriated. I believe the county funding was appropriated or has to be appropriated. And then, so that idea of $6 million, and then this is another $2 million on top of that. And I believe what's needed is around 10 to 12 million total for this overall. But I think Matt Wachter might be here if he wants to jump in at all.
Dave, I think you covered it. I think the scenarios that engineering has looked at are all more in that $10 million range. Yes.
Okay, and then my second question is regarding the summer youth employment. Is any of this gears towards youth that are already in the system?
I'm going to defer to Jim on that.
Alder Carter, these funds are intended to be used to expand existing programming. So they would be contemplating adding young people that are not currently in the system, but go above and beyond what would already be served with funds that we've got access to.
Okay. And then my last question has to do with the Violence Prevention Initiative. Is that in addition to what monies we gave them thus far? I think we gave them some money not too long ago. We expanded for them for that program.
Yes, this is in addition to that funding.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions for staff? Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Dave, for your, as always, insightful presentation. I'll just point out that your comments during the presentation did add, I think, very important information to what was printed on the slides. So with all that said, let me start out maybe more broadly with the process and say, Mayor, I applaud you for the very difficult job that you had before you and for accomplishing, I think, a really excellent product in terms of community investment priorities. And those are all really, laid out specifically in the resolution that we have before us, the budget amendment we have before us, in terms of immediate needs for our community. With that said, could I ask both Your Honor and Dave the thought as to what was decided at this juncture to include in this budget resolution versus later resolutions? Dave, as you know, you and I had a brief conversation about this late last week, and the lack of specific language in this resolution and the thought process behind that. Could you go into a little more detail for the committee and Mayor, you as well, of course, please, as to what the thinking was as to what would be included here now versus in a mid-year appropriation or end-of-year appropriation? And again, I'm thinking of monies for 2021 at this point, not the 22 budget.
You want me to start, Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So the thinking with this resolution was a focus on the community investments. And then some of those items within community investments were both ready to go, but also, I think identify immediate needs in the community, whether it be, we're partially into the summer, so youth employment, economic recovery, and those sorts of having the funding available and appropriated so it could be spent as rapidly as possible. So and then some of the items need some further development. They're maybe on a slightly longer timeline, and so perhaps more appropriately addressed in the 2022 operating and capital budgets, which will not be that long until those are before you for further discussion and consideration. On the sort of government services side, we have both, I think, the need to get further into the fiscal year so we know what the gaps are in the general fund as well as the room tax funds. We have a little more precision with that. And then we do have those sort of usual vehicles to address that, namely the mid-year appropriation. I don't expect a lot to be in that appropriation. And again, as you know, we tend to focus on the year-end appropriation for, how are we going, like we did in December of 2020. What are our gaps? How are we going to allocate dollars to meet that? What are our mechanisms going to be to do that? And those are better vehicles, I think, than where we're at right now for addressing that portion of it. And then again, a large share of the ARPA funding and for government services will be really about how to balance the 2022 budget and charge costs to ARPA as a means of rebuilding our rainy day fund.
Thank you. Did you wish to add anything on that point, Mayor, at all?
No, I think Dave covered it. I mean, I guess I would say just more broadly, going into this, there's a few things that I was really trying to pay attention to. And so the first thing Dave already alluded to in the presentation was I really wanted to front load the amount of funds that we get out to and get them working in the community. And so I think you see that reflected here. And I'm hoping that particularly, for example, in the youth employment realm, that, by funding proposals that we already received and couldn't fund, that will make the impact on the street happen sooner, right? And there's a couple other examples of that, I think, in this as well. The second thing that I really was trying to focus on is prioritizing what I heard from each one of you and from your colleagues on the council when I had one-on-one conversations with you about not just how we should allocate these funds from ARPA, but also what you'd like to see in the capital and operating budgets. And I tried to keep very careful track of what folks listed as their priorities in those conversations and incorporate those, at least certainly the broad categories in this framework. But as Dave said, there's a number of things that we really would like to get going as soon as possible, which is why they're listed as amendments in this resolution, and other things that are really going to need, staff are going to need some more time to really flesh out. And the majority of things in this resolution, regardless of whether they're for 21 or 22, whether they're included now or will come through later, you will see again in some way. There's a number of things that will need either a resolution or an ordinance change. There's a number of things for which we'll probably go out to RFP. And so there'll be a whole process around that. So this is really designed to be the sort of high level framework to get a few things going that we want to see happen quickly, and then to sort of expect that we will see a number of the other pieces move through over time to this body, but also other committees and ultimately the council.
Thank you. And I will add at this point that certainly my recollection is in our one-on-one conversation on this topic that you did include in various ways everything that the two of us discussed in that conversation. So I thank you personally for that. Again, continuing kind of on a process theme here, can I just ask then at this point, the written presentation that I know is obviously attached to this budget resolution and Legistar program obviously is extremely detailed in many respects and goes well above and beyond the resolution in terms of our future intentions. Is it a fair statement to say that, at least as of today, Mayor, that presentation reflects your current thinking in regards to the almost entirety of the $47 million in ARPA funds? And so,
yes.
And so interested parties should take comfort if their immediate priorities are included in the presentation, but not the resolution tonight.
Yes.
Very good. So more specifically, on behalf of my colleagues at the Monona Terrace Board and the Room Tax Commission, and Commissioner Carter is obviously here from that group. We obviously have had a very difficult time in the last year and a half dealing with the fiscal realities of the room tax fund condition. And so I really appreciate the commitment that was shared in the presentation to make us as whole as possible in terms of the room tax fund condition and the Monona Terrace fiscal condition, including our depleted reserves that have been completely wiped out, as was mentioned in the presentation. Could one of you, again, Mayor or Dave, speak to the timing and reiterate, if I don't want to put words in either of your mouths, but reiterating that you are supportive to make efforts in it, make it clear in advance of the Room Tax Commission scheduled deliberations this August and September on next year's appropriations to ensure that we do have the sufficient funding to fund our important work.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak generally, and then Dave can speak to the specifics. But yes, I think that these are the areas that we have seen probably the most significant revenue loss and sort of subsequent large problem that doesn't have another way to solve, right? And that is in the Monona Terraces, just basically total loss of events, their complete exhaustion of their reserves. That has to be dealt with. And that is exactly the kind of thing that I think the federal government intended for these funds. And so I'm very committed to that. I think similarly, the precipitous drop in the room tax has made, as you say, it very difficult for the Room Tax Commission to figure out how to deal with that loss of revenue. This is obviously not going to meet all of the need or cover all of the losses, but I believe it will help. And I think Dave can speak to the timing, but I feel like, these are places where there really isn't another financial solution, and it's important for us to focus on them for these funds. But Dave, do you want to speak to the timing?
Certainly, Mayor. Again, I think much like we did in 2020, that these issues would be addressed through the year-end appropriation, meaning that, for example, one mechanism will probably be, that will be proposed much like it was in the 2020 year-end appropriation would be no transfer of room taxes to the general fund. So that would be a mechanism then to leave more room tax in the room tax fund to support the programs, and then to use that surplus from TID 25, which again, until the TID is closed, we can't access, but once it is, we can access, and that requires some other discussions as well. But ultimately, that's the strategy, is to address the deficit at year end in the room tax fund. So again, without having to further cut the overture funding, Monona Terrace subsidy, or the Destination Madison support. And then again, not have to, so the 2021 allocations to those programs would remain as was originally adopted by the Room Tax Commission. And then through these strategies that have been laid out, and again, that'll probably be done through the year-end appropriation, and in terms of the actual movement of dollars and so on. And then the Room Tax Commission then would really have to look at ahead to 2022 and what the projected revenues are there, and decisions on the allocations it would make, as it normally does.
Thank you both for that very much. Is there any chance that we might include a nod to these issues in the mid-year appropriation, or at this point you really are more supportive of more or less sharing with the Room Tax Commission, Dave, as you have in prior years, what you're comfortable that we have available to us to allocate, and then have the council confirm that through the budget process, but moreover than for this year, the year-end appropriation.
Yeah, we can certainly take a look at that. I think the mid-year appropriation might be a little premature, since we won't know exact. We'll have better information by the year end. Another quarter of room tax collections, 2 quarters actually. So we'll just have a better sense of what needs to be done. We'll be through the TID 25 closure resolution. Whatever we do with TID 25 has to be again discussed with the taxing jurisdictions, namely the school district and the county in particular. And so those processes need to be worked through, which is why I think the year end is probably the best time to address all of that.
I appreciate that. As it relates to Monona Terrace specifically, I don't want the current fiscal condition to prevent them from filling the unprecedented number of vacancies they have on their staff, which is numbering, I believe, around 10 FTEs currently. I believe, Mayor, perhaps you've made a commitment to allowing them to go ahead and continue the hiring process for some of those positions. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Connie and I have discussed it.
So what you're saying is that at this point you are comfortable with authorizing the filling of at least some of those vacant positions?
Yeah, I think at least we've talked about getting at least some of them filled. Obviously, that's a process.
Yeah, so lengthy process, right? Okay, well, thank you for that. And then I think the last area I just wanted to ask about, and the county's been mentioned a few times in the course of this discussion, most recently, and that the fact that we have to have apparently still a conversation with them about the good news of a TID 25 payout to them, perhaps coming in installments like the school district. But can you just confirm that the community investment priorities that we have before us now, and I could think of many examples. One that was mentioned during the presentation clearly that all of us could point to is the purpose-built men's shelter and our joint cooperation and collaboration and funding of that. Have we had meaningful conversations with their counterparts of the other end of the fourth floor as to how their significantly larger ARPA appropriation will mesh with the item that we have before us now, so that we're continue to collaborate and make sure that the investments are done in a thoughtful manner between our funding and their funding?
Although we have had those conversations, I don't want to speak for the county, but my impression is that they are largely going to follow the same sort of pathway and framework that they have with the previous federal dollars that they've received, which we of course did not receive, and that they will follow a very similar approach with these dollars. But yes, we have talked specifically about the purpose-built men's shelter, and a couple other of the items on this list where collaboration would be particularly important. And I mean, I'm confident we'll continue those conversations, and that we're not headed in different directions on them. I think we will continue to be in as much collaboration as possible on the not all of these items are relevant to the county, but certainly the ones that are.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, Dave, again.
Of course. Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter? Alder, you're muted.
Okay, thank you. I just have one more question. about the emergency rental assistance program. I remember at one point we were looking at a software. Will that software be completed, purchased?
Yes, Alder, I believe we're very close. Jim can confirm, but I think we're very close to implementation on that.
You're right, Mayor. We are finishing up the contractual agreement with the vendor and hope to have that online soon.
So we would be able to track who gets it and confirm that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, and have multiple community partners involved in that effort. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Mayor and Dave, I also want to thank you for your efforts with Monona Terrace and the Overture and also Destination Madison.
Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions for Dave or other staff? Seeing none, it has been moved and seconded. Is there discussion on item 17? Seeing no discussion, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of item 17? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 17 and go on to item 18. And just give me a moment to refresh here. On item 18, we have registrants starting with Dan Rolfs of Oak Ridge Ave, representing the Madison Professional and Supervisory Employee Association.
Good evening, folks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Thank you. I appreciate the time. Here to speak on behalf of the Coalition of General Municipal Employees. Just a little background. This resolution was proposed by our coalition members, who are lay people. We're not experts in federal government ease, and it was in response to the ARPA announcements. As you've heard earlier today from Mr. Schmiedeke, our focus here is a one-time payment to address concerns regarding ongoing budget obligations, but also to recognize the efforts made by general municipal employees during the pandemic and beyond. The premium pay category that's referred to in the resolution seemed the most logical, and our thinking was that this payment could be deferred until employees are no longer working remotely. That's roughly September of this year. We appreciate the legal review by City Attorney Haas, and we believe that a solution to the issues pointed out is to simply change the focus of the payment from change the focus of the payment to the revenue loss / government services category, which would address some of these concerns. The plan that was just laid out in the previous item on the Finance Committee agenda details $24 million and change of expenditures the city could make, many of which are not fully developed. Some of these funds could be used to recognize the contribution that city employees played in keeping the city running. You could spend some of those dollars to recognize that the city is benefiting from not maintaining wage equity to the tune of millions of dollars per year, estimating $4 to $5 million in 2020 and probably in excess of $6 million in 2021 and additional millions of dollars of savings in out years. This can be done to recognize that employees have gone above and beyond the call of duty in the past 16 plus months of the pandemic. It could be used to make up some portion of the shortfall that city employees continue to face from being 6% behind our brothers and sisters in labor. We have gone over and above what has been asked of us during the pandemic, and this is one way to make up some small portion of the shortfall that we're behind and to recognize the contributions that we provide during the pandemic and to the city as a whole. We hope that there is a proposal to make some amendments that would make this work and to recognize the contributions that we've made. Thank you very much. I yield the balance of my time.
Thank you. We also have Walt Jackson of Stoughton, Wisconsin, in support, available to answer questions, representing AFSCME Local 6000. Are there questions for either of our registrants? Should note there's a number of other registrants not wishing to speak. Seeing none. President Abbas?
I believe the motion is to adopt the resolution.
Is there a second?
Second to adopt, and I have an amendment.
Moved and seconded. And let's see if there are questions for staff.
Sure.
First, please. Seeing none, go ahead, Alder Carter.
I have an amendment that I sent around to the committee earlier, and I believe, Mayor, I included you in that amendment, and I probably should have included Attorney Haas, so I apologize for that.
And also, Mr. Schmidtke, Alder, if you could forward it to both of them, because
Sure.
Mr. Schmidtke is staffing the committee and needs it for the record.
Okay, I sure will. So one of the things that I wanted to say that
I'm sorry, Alder. So you're moving the amendment, but we need to see if there's a second. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Alder Carter's amendment. You should speak to it, Alder Carter.
Yes, I wanted to speak to this. Mr. Roth hit some of my points already. Was one, the authorizing of one-time payment under government services, removing the second whereas and inserting the third, fourth, and fifth whereas. I'm really looking at the fact that our government workers have really taken the toll or the heavy burden on not only what happened last year with COVID, but also in wages. So I just think that a one-time stimulus will not make them whole, but will definitely benefit them. And with that, I'm going to, in case Attorney Haas wants to comment on it, I'm going to send it to him real quickly, and also Dave.
Thank you, Alder. So let's see. We'll give them a moment to receive.
Yeah.
And Alder Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll have some comments generally, but I'm confused by the amendment, where the funding comes from and how it's different from the funding source of the original. So I don't know if that's something staff is able to review and clarify for me, or Mayor, if that's something that you can ask Alder Carter.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Let's see if Dave, I know that you just received it, or Attorney Haas, if your reading of the amendment changes the funding source at all.
Dave, I can't spell your name.
Well, first of all, the amendment isn't really clear on what is amended in the operating budget. It just says that the operating budget is amended accordingly. There's no dollar amount cited or funding source in that be it finally resolved clause. It does appear to make a one-time payment as the previous one did. It just simply changes the name, and it does continue to reference the ARPA local recovery funding as it did before. I think very generally, and I'll defer to Attorney Haas on this, but I think to the extent that any resolution is using funding for broad-based payments to workers that may be construed as premium or bonus payments, it might have issues with the Treasury rules on that in terms of the way that even the amendment is still constructed. But that last be a final resolve clause isn't very clear on what is being amended, by how much, and so on. But Mike might have some additional perspectives.
Attorney Haas, can you speak to this? And were you consulted on the language of this amendment at all?
No, I will say that a couple alders sent it to me after the Finance Committee meeting started tonight, so I appreciate that. So I've had a little bit of a chance to look at it. I agree with David. It's not clear if it is exactly tied to the ARPA funding or not. And looking at the original resolution as well, I mean, while all of the whereas clauses seem to reference in the fiscal note, seem to state that it was coming from ARPA funds, the be resolved clause did not actually say it. So my memo was based on the understanding that that was the intent. I think with the amendment, I guess my concern is I thought the first new whereas clause seems to tie it to the revenue loss provisions of ARPA. If that's the case, I still am not really convinced that it would be allowable under ARPA, at least, and I haven't gone back to read all the revenue loss rules since I received this, but my understanding was that provision of ARPA was really intended to replace revenue that was lost. And my concern would be that this would be a new expenditure that was not in place, and that was therefore not eliminated by a loss in revenue. And so I would still be concerned that we may run into some issues here with whether or not this is an allowable expense if the intent is to have it directly funded by ARPA funds. And again, that's just merely based on what, the half hour or so that I've had to look at this language and the ARPA rules.
And that was my intent. I should have put it in the final resolve.
So, Alder, just to be clear, your intent was to fund this from the ARPA allocation.
Right, government services.
Right. Thank you, Alder. And Attorney Haas, it's still your interpretation that any use of ARPA, regardless of what, quote, bucket we put it under, is not allowable for this.
Yes, I think there might be a little bit of confusion because I think the government services is referring to the way the mayor's proposal was, was organized. That doesn't necessarily correspond to the classifications under ARPA that the funds can be used for. There are, as we talked, I think as we included in the memo and Dave's information, there are 4 categories, and I think the government services, heading that the mayor used was allowable under the 4 categories, but it's not simply that ARPA has a government services category outside of the premium pay, specific provisions related to premium pay. There is a government services for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue due to COVID. And so that's where the revenue loss rules, I think, come into play.
Thank you, Attorney. President Abbas, question?
Yeah, Attorney has a quick question for you or either for David. It's about government services fund and APRA money. Is there any other community in Wisconsin or any you have any knowledge in US who use money for government employees? Like this intent of this resolution is very thoughtful to help municipal employees. Is there any example in US where it's been used or proposed?
I haven't had a chance to look around or ask, so I really don't know the answer to that question, President.
I
It's
appreciate
still
that.
pretty early as well. So I think communities are still sorting through all this, just like we are.
Thanks.
Alder, I think that I have not seen very many, but I have seen one or two that are, I believe, giving a bonus pay to, for example, their fire departments or to their EMS services that were clearly frontline workers, exposed to the public during the pandemic. I don't know of any community that is proposing an across the board to a segment of their employees, whether or not they had regular contact with the public during the pandemic.
Thank you, Mayor.
Alder Carter, questions?
I have a question for Attorney Haas. Aren't government employees, and I think you might not have had time to dig into it, aren't government employees part of government services because they provide the service?
Well, sure, but I think the ARPA provision refers, as I said, it says for the provision of government services to the extent of the reduction in revenue due to the COVID-19 public health emergency relative to revenues collected in the most recent full fiscal year prior to the emergency. And I think Dave alluded to, the calculations that they have to go through to determine what that revenue loss is. So I'm having a hard time, I guess, understanding the connection between the proposal for the one-time payment and identifying a reduction in revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. I have just a really simple question for Attorney Haas. We've gotten obviously a 5-page memo on this. We've talked about this a bit this evening and got an email from David Schmidtke about this last week. Very simply, if we take a gamble on something like this and the government determines that we did not listen to the rules, what happens? Where does that money come from?
That's correct. There's a provision, first of all, that the federal government can recoup what it considers to be an improper use of the revenue. And, that would be the responsibility. If that happened, that would be the responsibility of the city to pay that back.
And I assume we would have to just find a funding source somewhere and figure that out.
That's right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Figueroa Cole.
Dave, can you explain what is the extent of the reduction revenue and what does that mean on the clause that Attorney Haas was referencing, please?
So under the Treasury interim rule, each community that receives the funding, in order to use the funding for government services costs, and that's broadly defined under the rule, you have to perform a test every year. And they call it basically a counterfactual test, meaning you're comparing the actual revenues collected each year with what revenues would have been if not for the pandemic. And you perform that test in 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023 using actual revenues. So we only have 2020. We compared our actual revenues, and as I said during the presentation, it's all the revenues that the city collected except for revenues to the transit utility and the water utility. And it also excludes any sort of federal money that we receive. And so you take that big bundle and you compare it to what revenues we would have gotten, and that difference is $44 million. And so and we anticipate that we'll have, that there'll be that gap probably for each year that the test is performed. And so what that says is you can then spend that amount of the ARPA dollars received on government services if you so choose under that category.
So then I think I understood all of that, surprisingly. So then the question, I'm sorry, I think I got it. So going back to the question from Attorney Haas, on regards to the clause related to government services, why would it be? What is the reason for this not to be counted as a allowable expense or allowable allocation?
The concern from my perspective would be that we have to actually send those costs to the federal government, or they may audit us, and they would say, well, the city provided what looks like what you called a premium payment to all of your employees. And so, but there's a clear definition of what an essential worker is, and not all of the workers that were provided with this payment would be defined as essential workers under the Treasury rules. So there's a risk then that those costs would not qualify, and then that would have to be paid back to the federal government. I think that's the overall risk that we're talking about right now. And I'm not going to speak for Mike on that, but that's sort of my view of the risk that's involved here, and that risk that while we may call government services some sort of large category, the Treasury may say, well, we already defined what essential worker is, and so you can spend it on government services to the extent that it's consistent with, if you're going to make this type of payment, that an essential worker is such and such. But
although I don't like, the Treasury specifically defined how to do a premium payment. And I don't think just because we say that it's under the revenue loss or the government services category that they would care about that. I mean, I understand the frustration. I understand, the desire here. But I just don't think that there's a way to do what this resolution and this amendment wants to do with ARPA money. Now, there are ways that you could do premium pay for some of our employees if you were to meet the essential services definition. And I think it's worth mentioning, the federal government clearly designed it to be both essential services employees and lower income employees. And this resolution does neither. And in fact, would exclude a whole swath of our essential service employees, the majority of them. And so I don't, we can talk about our own definitions as much as we want, but what matters is the Treasury definitions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter.
Okay, thank you, everyone, for your dialogue on this. At this time, I would like to, what can I do at this time? Because I wanted to place it on file.
Alder, I think you
but
could.
I already hit. Go ahead.
You could withdraw your amendment with the consent of the body, and that would take us back to the main motion, which then someone, yourself, could make a motion to place on file.
Okay, that's what I will do.
Right, so Alder Carter would like to withdraw her amendment. Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, that takes us back to the main motion. Alder Carter, would you like to make an alternate motion?
Yes, I like to place it on file without prejudice.
Alder Carter moved to place on file without prejudice. Is there a second?
Second.
President Abbas will second. The motion before us now is to place on file without prejudice. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to placing item 18 on file without prejudice? Seeing no objection, that item will be placed, the recommendation will be to place on file without prejudice. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Is there a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn.
And a second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of adjournment? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your night.